Hello and welcome back to the MacGuffin Tapes. I'm your host, Michael, worshipper of the cage, and with me, as always, is Ala, worshipper of the Baal. How are you doing?
My God, this is like sounding like a cultist podcast with every new iteration.
It gets worse and worse each
And the
episode.
theme is not making it any better.
Yeah, well, that's why I chose that intro because we're back here to talk another movie, and that movie is From Dusk Till Dawn. And the occasion is the movie's 30th anniversary.
It's also, very. The podcast started with a vampire film, and we keep coming back to the topic of vampire films over and
Yeah,
over again. And it's not a surprise that we're talking about From Dusk Till Dawn
you keep
either.
coming back. I don't know why. I don't know why
I
these
do know
vampires.
why vampire movies are the best.
Wasn't this one of your favorite movies or one of the movies you grew up with?
It was definitely one of the movies I grew up with. As weird as it sounds, I always have to give a disclaimer. I had an older brother who was 11 years older, so he brought home a lot of stuff that I then watched as well. And one of those things was From Dusk Till Dawn. He brought home a lot of like this kind of horror-y grungy stuff like that. And so, yeah, I ended up watching that when I was probably about, I don't know, 10 maybe, or around that, maybe a little earlier than that. And yeah, I mean, I liked the movie, I guess. It's weird, but I did like it.
You weren't scared? The vampires didn't scare you?
No, the vampires actually never, like generally speaking, I watched a lot of vampire films and vampires never scared me. There was not a single vampire film that I was scared of. I never really considered vampires to be scary.
Hmm.
It's kind of exciting to watch. I would say my problem was more with ghosts. So if there were ghosts involved, then I would be scared, especially if those ghosts were children. That is my biggest nightmare. For whatever reason. But yeah, vampires never really scared me. And so when I watched it as a kid, that was also not scary to me.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one reason is that if I remember the design of the vampires in this movie, it's well mostly prosthetics, and it reminds me a bit of the vampires in or the mask that they used in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Hmm.
So they're like creature-like, and maybe
Hmm.
that contributes to the fact, well, that they aren't that scary, and
Yeah.
it's still fine to see.
I think the problem with this film is less the vampires and more the graphic nature of the films. It's very, first of all, explicit. I actually explicit in all kinds of things. So there's kind of well, the language, colorful language in the movie, and a lot of violence. So those are probably more the issue with the age that I was in rather than being scared of the vampires. I think, yeah, this was not necessarily the biggest concern.
Yeah, it is rated R, and I even read pre-production for the production of this movie. They even they changed the blood of the vampires to green so that
Mm.
they would get a better rating. Yeah, but maybe as you said, the humans and are a bit more scary in this movie.
True. The scariest character in this movie is not actually a vampire. I guess we'll figure it out soon.
Yeah, I first watched this movie about exactly 1 year ago, and it was I heard that this was a screenplay by Quentin Tarantino, and a lot of film critics and cinephiles recommend this movie. It's a cult classic. And then I think the other factor was that you mentioned that it was one of the movies that you grew up with. So that's how I came to finally watching it last year. Yeah, and about the show. So today it's going to be a bit of a different format. What we're going to do, we're going to discuss the film from the screenplay's perspective. We have the screenplay before us, and then we'll get deep into some of the scenes, but mostly discuss the narrative elements and structure of this movie. The idea is that it's a learning experience for us and you as well. And yeah, so we're very curious how this turns out. Just a couple of things from the production or writing background before we get into it. The story was developed by Robert Kurtzman, who is a director and also makeup artist, and he contributes a lot with Mike Flanagan in horror movies like Doctor Sleep, Geralt's Game, and also the series The Haunting of Hill House. And then he turned that script to Tarantino, who wrote the screenplay for this movie. I think this was around the time he also was doing Pulp Fiction, but Tarantino felt that, well, he wasn't the right person to direct this movie, and he handed this over to Robert Rodriguez to direct. Yeah, that's about it. What I have from the pre-production and production for this movie that's relevant
Hmm.
for today.
I would say this is one of those films that are also very, very much Robert Rodriguez type of film. He is kind of known for, yeah, kind of like this type of grungy, raunchy type of film that are very explicit, mostly kind of horror slash action films. What are some other ones that people probably know?
Well, for me, I was thinking more about the action, the over the top action, and then we have
Yes,
these
for
movies
sure.
with Antonio Banderas. What's it called?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Desperado, yeah, that's the one. That
Hmm.
is probably also one of those very well-known ones. And I think it has a very like it has this connection also to From Dusk Till Dawn because I feel like it's the character of Seth and the character like of George Clooney's character in From Dusk Till Dawn and Antonio Banderas's character in Desperado are very similar in vibe. So it's like very hyper masculine macho type men. And it's all, well, not always, but a lot of the time, Robert Rodriguez's films are set in kind of um, New Mexico, Texas, so very southern states. And this also adds a very specific vibe to his films. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe that's one of the reasons why Quentin Tarantino chose him to direct this movie because, well, at least the last stretch of this movie takes place in over the border
In
of
Mexico,
in
yeah.
Mexico. Yeah. Hmm.
What we can also just say is this is also one of the few films where Quentin Tarantino plays a role. He's an actor in this film. He is known to have cameos in some of his films or some other directors' films, but in this film, he actually plays quite a big role, and he is well, in the film for, well, pretty much all of the action that is taking place. And so, along with Quentin Tarantino, we have George Clooney, Harvey Keitel, Juliette Lewis, and those are probably the major set of characters that we follow.
The movie opens with the exterior of a liquor store at day. And, well, it says a convenience store in a Texas suburb, no other businesses surrounded. And yeah, this is where this Texas Ranger pulls in Earl McGraw to buy some whiskey at the store. And then we have this store manager called Pete, and they exchange some small talk and they talk about what's been going on in the town. And yeah, well, the sheriff McGraw or the ranger is talking about these bandits or robbers that have been raging in Texas and have been killing a lot of people. What I find really interesting in this scene is, well, I wrote this down as objective versus subjective narration. The movie starts already in medias res, so it already started in the sense that the brothers, the main characters Seth and Richard, are already on the run. And what I find interesting, or what I mean with objective versus subjective perspective, that, well, we get part of their backstory, or how this began, narrated through here McGraw, who tells Pete, okay, what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the objective perspective, because, well, we get that from a third narrator.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a second, we are getting to Richard and Seth, who are in the store, holding some people hostage. And then we get to experience them as characters from first hand, because we are living the scene with them.
Mm-hmm.
When I was thinking about that scene and how I framed that, you could also think it the other way around, that, well, it's actually what's happening in the scene is the objective part, because we're living with them like in a documentary style way. And what the Macra is telling us is sort of his subjective perspective, how he is framing these two characters and what happened with them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting device to yeah, give the this opening some sort of groundedness,
Mm-hmm.
let's call it.
Yeah, I would say this is used to kind of give an external introduction to the characters that we're gonna follow, right? But yeah, as you said, we get it through a different character, a character that is also on the other side of the law, kind of. So he is the antagonist to the protagonists we're gonna follow, right? Yeah, I guess it is interesting. What I also think is very suitable to both the screenwriter and the director is the fact that we kind of start in action already. It's not a very slow start to the film. First of all, we are introduced already into an ongoing manhunt, and it doesn't take a long time for like murder and shooting to start. It's gonna start pretty much in that very scene, right?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, Magro goes to the loo, and in the meantime, Seth and Richard approach Pete, the guy working at the liquor store, and tell him to play it cool, to not give them away. And Pete sort of responds, "Well, okay, I had to let him go to the bathroom, otherwise that would have been suspicious." And reassuring Seth and Richard that he is playing it cool. But Richard already mentions to Seth in a low voice that he signaled the ranger. And Pete says, "Okay, no, I didn't. You gotta believe me, I didn't." Seth
Hmm.
is a bit skeptical, and Richard mentions that he wants to shoot Mag, or he suggests to shoot Magro once he comes back from the toilet.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think this is also already in this scene, it is telling that we get this again also antagonizing vibe from Richard. And I think this is the first instance where you are a bit skeptical. You are made to be a bit skeptical of what his intentions are and how well, yeah, his intentions, his motivations, and whether he is almost like sane in that moment. Because, I mean, yeah, I don't know if sane is the right word, but
I would
let's
go
just
for
leave it at that, I guess, for now.
I would frame it like that, that she's portrayed as an insane person, or delusional, or
I,
super
yeah,
mistrusting.
either mistrusting or paranoid, which doesn't make him insane. I guess paranoid is a better word and a better
Mhm.
framing for this, but yeah, so you kind of have this juxtaposition between Seth. I mean, obviously they find themselves in a very high stakes, stressful situation, so
Yep.
neither of them is chill. But in this high stakes, stressful situation, I think you kind of have a glimpse of how they both behave and who is more stable and in what way stable. I think they both showcase different stable mentality, but I would say that it's towards different aspects of the situation. I think Seth is probably he needs to control the situation. He's not necessarily chill about what is going on, but it feels like Richard is antagonizing and is raising the stakes because somehow that makes him feel that is what he needs and that is his motivation is making, well, technically speaking, making the situation worse, kind of to reach a certain goal that he has internally that maybe he doesn't even know that he does.
Paranoid at this point of the movie is the better word, because it's a bit
Hmm.
ambiguous if, well, is Richard making these things up, or is he sort of anticipating like worst case
Hmm.
scenario? And like you said, it's we don't know if it's him as a character at this point, or if it's just a situation that makes him a very uncomfortable or aware. So yeah, it's yeah, a bit left ambiguous at the beginning if well, Pete actually signaled McGraw or not.
Hmm.
But yeah, when McGraw comes back, then what happens? Well, Richard shoots him in the head, and then from there everything escalates. The people that the brothers were holding hostages, they run out, and the shootout between them and Pete starts, who had a gun hiding behind the counter. And Pete shoots Richard, shoots a hole in his hand. And after that, they sort of the brothers throw themselves behind the shelves. And it's really interesting the strategy that Seth has, because he tells his brother to shoot the alcohol behind the counter where Pete is crouching, and then he takes, I think, a toilet paper, lights that up
Hmm.
with some lighter fluid, and throws that behind the counter so that that bursts into flames.
Hmm. So, what would you say do we find out about the characters and about, I would even say specifically about the relationship between the brothers from that scene and how is it shown?
For me, here, Seth is the problem solver.
The brains of the operation.
Yeah. So he improvises on the spot, and he cares for his brother because he asked him if he's okay. Well, Richie said, well, it hurts like hell or something like that, but he's fine. We can see the care that Seth has for Richard because, well, he Richard is the one that puts him into this dire situations, but he still
Hmm.
supports him in a way.
Hmm. Okay. So we have one brother who is a problem solver who cares for his brother, and his brother is more of a rabid dog that kind of creates all the problems. I also think that, well, in the scene where he kind of signals to Seth, Richard signals to Seth that maybe Pete could have given a signal to the ranger. you don't know enough about them and their situation to be able to judge whether that is true. I think it's only later on with hindsight you realize that maybe Richard is so paranoid that well, he could have said that, but maybe that's just the paranoia speaking rather than any fact. But what is still true is that Seth reacts to this, well, to Richard saying that, and he believes him. So I think he still tends to listen to his brother, although it's also not very clear yet at this point. I think at this point they still are kind of working as a team, although later on you do find out that there is some background where there's probably history to Richard where Seth probably doesn't believe him 100% of the time or doesn't trust him and his behavior. But in this situation, for now, we see this kind of caring side to Seth, and yeah, a bit reactive or impulsive side to Richard, right?
Yeah, I like how you framed it that Richard is like a rabid dog because yeah, it's his impulsiveness, but at the same time, Seth cares for him, but is aware of his nature. And yeah, so what's interesting here, there's this exchange between Seth and Richard as they're running out of the store and driving away. And here, Seth says, "What did I tell you? What did I tell you? Buy the road map and leave." Richard, "What am I supposed to do, Seth? He recognized us." Seth, "He didn't recognize shit." Um,
Yeah, okay,
and
see.
already this sort of, well, Seth is trying to maintain a low profile,
Mm-hmm.
and Richards, I was thinking maybe he wants to get
Mm-hmm.
into risky situations. Maybe he gets a kick out of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he makes a problem out of, what's the expression, smoke out of nothing,
Mm-hmm.
because he likes to feel that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the internal motivation that would be interesting also to explore, but generally speaking, I think on the surface level, at least, it is clear that he is paranoid for whatever reason, but there's, I think, enough reason to assume that there's an underlying psychological issue to Richard. But obviously there must be an underlying psychological issue to Seth of a different kind in which he kind of still follows his brother, still protects his brother, and still kind of works with him in whatever capacity to, well, despite the fact that he is probably very aware that Richard is not right in the head.
This first scene closes with them driving away, and then the opening credit sequence plays, and we get to see the trunk of the car and the hostage inside the car, which is also like a trademark of Tarantino's,
Hmm.
according to IMDb.
True, yeah. Um, but so basically, from this scene, we also definitely know that we are following anti-heroes. Those are our protagonists. There's no no two ways about it. There's no illusion. It's pretty clear that we are following the bad guys, while yeah, they are, well, fighting off so far good guys that are trying to catch them.
The second group of characters is the Fuller family. Let me just read you here the slug line, the scene description, because I want to get your opinion on that. It says Emma and Pete's patrons are made up of regular truckers, cowboys, and road weary travelers. The camera dollies through the maze of tables, patrons, and waitresses. It stops when it gets to a table occupied by the Fuller family. The Fullers definitely fall into the road weary category. The members of the unit consist of the father Jacob, age 44, an ex-preacher, a good man with rough edges, and his two children, Kate, age 19, is a young beauty who possesses what can only be described as an apple pie sensuality. She is dressed like a nice Christian girl, complete with crucifix. Scott, age 16, is Jacob's Vietnamese adopted son. Scott is a likable, long-haired kid who always wears a t-shirt with the name of the heavy metal band Garage. With the heavy metal garage band he plays guitar for, Precinct 13. The three of them are wolfing down a late lunch. So what do you think of the description of these characters here?
I would be interested to see how this scene was realized because obviously reading the description you get a lot of context, but I wonder how it looked in the film. I don't quite remember it anymore. I know you wanted to talk about the apple pie sensuality, so
Yeah, what does
if we
that
want to
mean?
start with this, we can.
I thought it was very specific and maybe a bit weird, so I don't know what that does that even mean. Maybe you have a clue to that.
I think that was realized pretty well in the film. So apple pie in general refers to a very all-American type of girl. So apple pie is kind of this cozy, homey vibe. And it's kind of, I guess, similar to saying the girl next door. So someone who is, well, not, not some kind of an Instagram beauty, but a very natural kind of girl. Very, I guess, in a way, maybe naive and um, well, young-ish and yeah, well, a
In
person that you kind of know forever. You know her since school. You went to school together, and at some point you both grow up and you start developing feelings to this person, or you notice an attraction that you have to this person. So that is the type of vibe that I think this refers to. And obviously, they talk about sensuality here. So it is very specifically sexual in nature. So it's not going to be like just a very platonic vibe. I think that is also pretty clear, but also considering that it is a Tarantino and Rodriguez film, this is pretty clear too, because they tend to be more explicit and, well, the sexuality is very open. And I think this is kind of juxtaposed to a very aggressive type of sexuality we get from the vampire queen, or, well, Salma Hayek's character later on, because this obviously there is this kind of general juxtaposition of you get to go to a basically a strip club, right? And that's where most of the action is happening. And yet there's this girl who is, well, doesn't fit in at all to this vibe, right?
Yeah, maybe what were you saying? You described her as naive. I was thinking, well, innocent, and I guess for me, the
Yeah,
line I can relate to a bit more is the Christian aspect, also in regard to her father, who is a preacher.
exactly.
But I think a good point is also that you mentioned that she's very relatable, or that everyone has or knows a person like this from their life.
Hmm.
I was
Exactly, yeah.
also thinking you compared her to Salma Hayek's character later, and I was thinking, well, maybe I don't know. She is like, for me, she's the virgin character in some
Hmm.
way that we have in a lot of horror movies as well.
Hmm.
And I remember, I think, watching the movie for the first time. I thought she was a minor. Juliette Lewis looked really young. I guess also because how she was dressed and so forth. She was actually 23 at the time of
Hmm.
filming this.
I think also I'm not sure if they somehow mentioned her age explicitly in the film. I think it does get mentioned that she is over 18 for sure. Although it's coming from her own mouth, so you kind of get the sense that maybe she is lying, or at least as far as I remember. But and I think what is also what this plays with is the final girl trope, right? Because this is usually the type of character in it, generally speaking, the trope in horror film, the final girl trope is that there is a girl character, female character that is the only one that survives in the end. And usually those characters are the innocent and more kind of quiet girl type. And usually the women that are more explicit in or more open in their sexuality are the ones to die first. That is at least if you regard like a few of those like very like horror films that are set in those groups of college kids or high school kids, this is usually what tends to happen. And I think she fits this trope quite well. So,
Yeah, you're right, and maybe how you just described it. Well, in movies around this time, like 80s, 90s, well, I guess how I just read it into it now is why they survive is because of these values of, I don't know, innocence, virginity, or whatever. But
yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is more of a kind of male perspective plus I don't think this is something we should be perpetuating because
no, no.
it is kind of slut shaming. It has kind
Mhm.
of questionable things about it. So yeah, but definitely something that comes from this era of horror
Yeah.
films.
Yeah, that's how it looks a bit to me in this movie, and thank God we moved on from, or that trope evolved in the sense that nowadays, well, the women or girls that survive at the end of the movie are usually a lot more badass and a lot more, or it's usually more also about a revenge story. So, but at least in this movie, I don't know, it's like you said, that typical trope, or there's not a,
Mhm.
I feel like there's not a spin around this
hmm
trope.
hmm To be fair, though, she is also the only girl in this film, apart obviously from Salma Hayek, but you cannot really consider her because she is on the antagonist side of things, and on the good people side, on the protagonist side that you follow, she is also the only girl. So I now opened the Wikipedia page for Final Girl, and I found this line here. The final girl in many movies shares common characteristics. She is typically sexually unavailable or virginal and avoids the vices or of the victims like illegal drug use. So I think, yeah, I mean, this is definitely has some space here in this movie as well.
Well, at least to the drug use, she does consume alcohol when they arrive at that
hmm
bar at the end of the movie. It's a small thing, but yeah. In this opening, I just read this last line. The three of them are wolfing down a late lunch, already letting us know where this movie is headed tonally with this, well, I guess monster kind of vibe.
hmm About Jacob, the information we received is that he is an ex preacher, a good man with rough edges. How is that shown? I mean, obviously we get Harvey Keitel as the character here, right? So
Yeah.
he plays all kinds of different characters. He plays gangsters, he plays nice ex-preachers. So like he can do a lot of different things. How is that shown here in the movie?
I think a lot of it comes from Harvey Keitel's performance. I remember watching this. Well, I was surprised that he was playing this character who was reserved or a bit boring.
hmm
But at the same time, his casting with him being in Reservoir Dogs, for example, and Scorsese's movies. So that sort of energy you see that in the third act of or the
hmm
of the movie. But I think From the script's perspective, there are a couple of exchangers later with Seth that
Hmm.
point towards his rough edges.
Hmm. Um, well, he is also the way that they portray him, he is wearing glasses, he's wearing a hat, and I mean, they're all dressed. I don't know if you can even say that in that context, but especially if you look at Juliette Lewis' character, she is dressed modestly. And I feel like you can even say that about Harvey Keitel's character as well. So you do get the sense of a very specific type of person. I'm not sure though that you find out straight away that he's an ex-preacher.
I'll read you here a line or two that were interesting in that regard, because I think in this scene here at this diner when they're having breakfast, Jacob excuses himself, and then we have Kate and Jacob talking about where they're at
Hmm.
and so forth. And that's when we find out that he's a pastor. Kate says, Dad, when I called the machine to check our messages, there was
Hmm.
one from Bethel Baptist. Mr. Franklin said he wouldn't permanently replace you until we came back. He said, when we come home, if you still feel the same way, Jacob, that's very nice of Ted, but I'll call him tomorrow and tell him not to bother waiting. Kate, I didn't want to talk about this in front of Scott because he gets upset, but you don't believe in God anymore? Jacob, not enough to be a pastor. Look, I know this is hard on you kids. After Jenny's death, this is probably the last thing you need, but I can't do it any longer. My congregation needs spiritual leadership. Well, they can't get that from me anymore. My faith is gone. To answer your question, yes, I do believe in Jesus. But do I love them? No. After Jenny died, I just thought, what's the point?
Hmm. Okay. So you also get a lot of context to his kind of backstory as well from this, and as to why exactly he might have lost his faith.
Yeah, and then this will be interesting as we move through the movie, like
Hmm.
how that belief or how his faith changes.
So we talked about Jacob and we talked about Kate. We haven't talked about Scott as of yet. Is there something we want to say here?
Yeah, Scott is a sort of side character, minor character. I mean, in the this opening description, it also said he's always listening to music. He's sort of in his own world for most of the movie, mostly in the background. So he doesn't get a lot of lines or action. He does get some moments at the end. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Why is he included in the movie?
Actually, good question. Well, first of all, he's an adopted son. I think that adds an element to Jacob's character. He is, I think in the script it says Vietnamese. Um, so that is again also going to be referenced later on. There's going to be racist comments regarding that from other characters. I think this is probably the most important, like as far as I'm concerned, this is the most important angle of him being in the movie is that he kind of adds to the other characters, or specifically to the character of Jacob, I guess in a way to the character of Kate, showing her as a sister, because I think she also tries to protect both Jacob and Scott later on in the film. I mean, they all kind of stand up for each other. What we also find out is that he is kind of a character. Well, he tries to be independent and he tries to act grown up. He is 16, but he, like, for example, offers to drive the car or the camper that they're in, which Jacob doesn't allow. I feel like it's mostly to create more dynamic, but he is not as important as a character himself, like as a character with agency, let's say. There's not a lot of action that he himself brings in a way. I don't know how to say it, but like I feel like
Hmm.
if he was missing, there wouldn't be a lot of action missing. There would just be a lot of dynamics in the family missing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think he's mostly a reactive character and
Hmm.
there to play off with well with Jacob and Kate, as you said. He
Hmm.
does have I guess narrative or emotional function in the last act. We'll get to that.
What I also wanted to ask here, so I know you wanted to talk about the name. So
Yeah.
specifically when it comes to Jacob, right? What do you
Yeah.
want to say to that?
I mean, just that well, Jacob is a biblical character's name. I looked a bit into that. Well, Jacob is later called Israel. I don't know if there is a direct link between the stories of these of the biblical character and the character in this movie. Um, I think there are other references that are or make more sense or are tied more into the themes of this movie, but maybe not this one. Or what do
Hmm.
you think?
So, but what is the background? Because I don't really know anything about biblical characters. So,
No, me neither. Me neither.
I am more interested also in the name Seth here. For me, the association here is with Set, the Egyptian god. Weirdly enough, I know more about that than I know about Christianity. In any case, he is Set is a god of violence and chaos in Egyptian mythology. So I think this is very suitable for what we get from George Clooney's character here.
As I said, I don't know this character Jacob specifically from the Bible. I read a bit briefly read about his story, but there wasn't anything really that I could connect to the character here in this movie.
Okay, well then maybe not necessarily.
Maybe it just points to the fact that he is religious and maybe he grew up in a
Mm-hmm.
religious family, comes from that sort of context, and
Yeah,
that's why he
probably.
chose to be a
That
preacher
makes
himself.
sense.
Just that as a simple reason. But yeah, Seth, I think that's a good point that, and you could read it like that, that he is sort of a
Hmm.
bringer of chaos and
Because also, if I just think about the name, I always actually it's funny, but I always think about that when there are sibling characters, I always think about the names because sometimes the names make sense. And it's like, well, if you named your first child that, it makes sense you would name your second child that. But sometimes those things don't match. And then I look into it more. That makes me kind of lean in and see and think, why is it like that? And for me, the names Seth and Richard are so far apart. It's like, why would you call one son Richard but then you choose Seth for another child? It's just kind of strange. Because I just feel like those two names, they don't live in the same space necessarily. Seth is a different kind of name. Richard is very traditional. It's quite a popular name. It's a rather simple name, if you can say it that way. And Seth is not as popular. It's not very common. And somehow for me, it carries this energy, like a very specific type of energy. And in this particular case, I associate it with the Egyptian god of chaos, but overall, Seth is a Hebrew name, and I think it is very prevalent among Jewish people, or more prevalent than among other people. So for me, the names Richard and Seth are not suitable, like not fitting together, and that's also another reason why it makes me think of of Seth being a very um like particular choice of name, and there's a reason behind that name.
yeah, well, this is my interpretation of it. It could be that they're actually half brothers,
Hmm.
and that well, they have different mothers or fathers. I think Seth is also the older brother,
Hmm.
and well, maybe Richard grew up with different parents or had a different childhood, a difficult childhood, and that's
Hmm.
why Seth is so overprotective of him. I don't know if overprotective, but well, he cares a lot for him.
Well, definitely
But yeah, this is all,
protective.
all this is all speculation and
Hmm.
interpreting what you just said. But I could see that. Yeah. What we forgot to mention about the Fuller family is that they are on the road with an RV because yeah, well, we mentioned that Jacob quit his job as a preacher, and then they decided to go on the road. But yeah, get that will be relevant in a second when we talk about how these two groups meet. But yeah, before that, Richard and Seth go to a motel where they want to stay, and that's where they um will hide their hostage who was in the trunk. And this lady was a worked at this bank that the brothers assaulted, and then they
Hmm.
took her with them.
Hmm.
And they get to this motel and check in, and then Seth has to leave Richard alone, but he goes to call this other character called Carlos, who will yeah help them once they're over the border with we also get a scene where Richard is sitting on the couch watching the news with this hostage. And this
Hmm.
again, for me, is what for me it's the same technique that I talked about before. Is that through the news we learn about the backstory of this brother, and that it's actually Richard who broke Seth out, who was serving sentence in prison for 8 years. And Richard breaks Seth out, and then they go on a run, and they killed, I think, 13 people, civilians and rangers, while they're escaping. So yeah, again, this technique, we learn that information from the news, which makes it a bit objective in a sense. Yeah, and I thought, well, when I first watched this movie, I didn't remember these information, because I think also from a sound perspective, I don't remember it being that clear. There's this information over the news, but yeah, it
Hmm.
adds to the backstory of these two characters.
Again, this is kind of an external background story that we get, right? So it goes along the same vein as it was in the beginning. We don't, which I think is great because you don't want your characters necessarily to openly talk about what's going on because it is going on with them, right? Like, why would they talk about it? And I mean, this is a very elegant way to do it because obviously they are on the run. There will be things on TV, so you can just use that. I think that's done really well. What I also think is if we kind of bring or if we break down this scene in the motel into three or even four pieces, you first get the conversation between Seth and Richard, where they kind of have a back and forth about having to pay Carlos for being able to, well, get wherever they need to get and be protected, kind of. And then Richard tries to argue, and but then Seth is kind of the one who says, "This conversation is over," and in a very commanding tone, in a commanding and yet like the tone that is soft enough to suggest that he is the one to be listened to, and he is the one that has the authority in this group, right? Because Richard doesn't argue with him anymore. He may not be, he may not agree, but he still doesn't argue, at least openly, with what Seth is suggesting. I think this is also a good way to how Seth is established as a kind of an authority figure. And well, we also saw him as an authority figure in other interactions, obviously, where they are talking to other people. He is the one to set the rules. He is the one to say what is going on, how things are going to unfold. So he is the one kind of controlling the situation. And he tells other people how they should act. And in this situation, we see that this is not only happening to people that are in danger of them, but also between themselves. He has the authority. Then the second part of this is where he Seth talks to Gloria, the hostage, where again we see him establish the rules of how she should behave, right? She shouldn't ask any questions, she should be quiet, and then she will stay alive. So kind of just giving her the breakdown of the success factors of her surviving and where they want to get basically from how they want to get out from this situation and what she should do to maximize the success.
Yeah, no, that's a great point that Seth takes the lead in their dynamic and
Hmm.
between them, and also when they are interacting with other characters. And that, again, for me, that gives me an impression that Seth is the older brother, or at least that he is a manager, or he tries to
Hmm.
manage these situations so that they don't get out of hand.
Hmm. What I also still wanted to mention is the third part of this kind of is when Richard is left alone with Gloria and how he interacts with her.
Hmm.
Um, because I think first of all, he kind of offers her to watch TV with him, right? He says, sit down here, make yourself comfortable, right? I think this is him already setting up what is to come. And I
Yeah.
think this is it's from this at least this is kind of the vibe that already got established and created from Richard, that's you kind of don't trust him. He is a bit of a weirdo and he gives off a very unhinged vibe. And from this you already kind of don't trust him enough. Like you're like something's up, something's gonna happen. And this is basically what eventually unfolds, right? Throughout this interaction, or wait, I don't quite remember, but I feel like there are some things where there are some looks from Richard towards Gloria that are a bit questionable. And you're already in that stage also, at least as far as I remember how it unfolds in the film. You're also kind of like, okay, something's coming. And I feel like it was his plan all along. He was never gonna act any differently.
Well, this is something that I missed the first time watching it. That in the TV as well, they mentioned that Richard is a sex offender and rapist.
Okay.
I didn't catch that the first time that I saw it. So like I said, maybe it's also a thing about the sound design where the volume of the TV isn't as loud, or it's this kind of sound that is not you can't understand very well all the time. Yeah, but well, we get to see that there's more to that when Seth returns. I also like this line here, which is a bit of a foreshadowing when Seth tells Richie well, he basically tells him what he was doing, and then he says, Richie, it's gonna get a lot fucking worse before it gets any fucking better. We showed our ass in Texas. We killed Texas fucking Rangers. They ain't gonna stop looking till they find us. And when they find us, they're gonna kill us.
Hmm.
Texans take it very personal when you kill their law enforcement officers. The
Hmm.
El Paso police have already started a motel and hotel search for us.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like this the first line somewhat foreshadowing what will happen.
Right. Well, actually, in the same line where she mentions, I found it in the script, the TV presenter says his younger brother Richard Gecko, a known armed robber and sex offender. So we do get the information that he is the younger brother.
Yeah, and here going back to names, Gecko, which is sort of this lizard sort
Yeah,
of
lizard pe
creature.
people.
Yeah, why do you think there's any meaning behind that name for these brothers?
I mean, I think just yeah, as you said, the kind of the general vibe and the association of kind of the slippery feeling you get, right, from those amphibious characters. I think that's just what you are supposed to read into that.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Seth comes back into the motel and we see Richard. He is alone and Gloria is not in the room and the door to the other room is closed, right? this is kind of the setup that we find ourselves in when Seth comes back. Mm, yeah, so I think at this point it's already pretty clear, or you get the sense, like this unsettling sense of something is up or something is wrong. Um, and then Seth, I guess, at some point catches up with that feeling as well, and he asks Richard where the hostage is. He then plays dumb, says she's in the other room, and um, I think when Seth then opens the door, we get flashes of clearly a very violent scene that unfolded. There's a lot of blood there too. So yeah, that is kind of where the scene starts, I guess, right? Um, and then Seth is berating Richard basically for this type of behavior.
Yeah. I also find this line interesting. This is just before Seth gets into the room or opens the door. Is
Mm-hmm.
Richard says, "Seth, before you open the door, let me explain what happened."
Mm-hmm.
So this for me is him already starting to apologize, and I wrote down in in my notes. Richard reminded me a bit of Gollum in a way, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that he has like two different personalities or can't really control himself, or yeah, he has like split personality, and that's why here he's sort of apologizing or excusing himself, or that he couldn't stop himself. But maybe it's more about what this means to Steph, what she just did. Not
Mm-hmm.
so he's not himself feeling guilty,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to explain to Seth what that means, and sort of calm him down.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also no ambiguity as to kind of the motivation behind her death. I think it is although he says she became a different person, um, she tried to escape, I think he says, and Seth doesn't believe him. It's also pretty clear from the way that she behaved with Seth that she would not probably have tried to escape. She was very scared. And also, if she tried to escape, why is she on the bed, partially naked, still on the bed that she was in, pretty much on the same side that she was in where we sat down? So, yeah, there's not really anything ambiguous to the motivation behind that. And this is one of the aspects that Seth then mentions that, well, he mentions the assault, and that he has nothing to do with that. That's not what he is about. And that he doesn't appreciate Richard being kind of into this. I don't know.
Yeah, two things. So, like the first thing is, well, the explaining that Richard does is not, maybe I said it wrong before. It's not to excuse himself, so he tries to reconstruct what happened, or what were the sequences that happened between him and Gloria. And the other thing, this is, well, you can see this in the movie more than it is here in the script. But I remember how this looks in the movie is, well, it's just basically red. I remember, and it's the most graphic scene in the movie from what I remember. And that we mentioned that Richard at least is more terrifying than some of the
Mhm,
other things we see later.
mhm. I mean, there's also, it's also again a juxtaposition between wanting to do harm and having to do harm in a way, because obviously we get the vampires, but to be fair, also, it being a vampire movie, we get into the vampire sequences so late in the film that the might have been even like if people who turn off the film in the middle, they will not even know it was about vampires. So, um, I think at this point we are so immersed into this cruelty and violence perpetuated by humans that vampires don't even scare us. And again, vampires, they have to feed to survive, right? What
Hmm.
does Richard have to do? Nothing. He doesn't really have to do any of that, but he chooses to do that, right? This is kind of senseless violence that he just has around him, he creates.
Yeah, he doesn't have to do that, but I think it's good that you bring up the vampires at this point because I think for Richard is a it's a compulsion as well, like as in
Yeah.
the vampires, he can't stop himself, and so yeah, in that regard, they are the
Well,
same.
a compulsion is still not a survival thing. I guess, in a way, psychologically, a compulsion is about survival, but it's
Mhm.
not really physical survival. It's more a psychological mechanism, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah,
right?
but yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It's psychological, but
Yeah.
for Richard, it is he has to do this because it's his survival depends on it.
Also, to be fair, you said it's a very violent scene, but actually, this is not the most violent scene. And we get, um, in a way, even they take care of us and they don't show it up front, right? In a way, you get flashes, you don't get like shown the whole thing.
Hmm.
But I actually, it's a very interesting question why, because there are all kinds of other violent scenes in the film, and we do get to watch them unfold in full. Why is that the scene where they're like, nah, that we will not subject you to this?
But you said it in the movie. It's like just the flashes, so like quick inserts that
Hmm.
are shown of what happened. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
So this is a trick that is used a lot in horror movies as well. Is that we don't get to see what happened or very briefly because what we imagine what
Hmm.
happened is more terrible,
Hmm.
or the pictures that we paint in our head are more gruesome and more terrible than that what you actually see on
Hmm.
screen.
Hmm. Yeah,
So maybe that's
that makes
also
sense.
why this is done this way.
Yeah. What I also wanted to say here, there's a bit of a discrepancy between the script and how it happens in the film. Let me go back to the script. Seth opens the door. The dead, naked body of Gloria lies on the bed. It's obvious Richard raped her and killed her. That's the script. Seth covers his eyes with his hands. He slowly enters the room with the dead body. Then Seth says to himself, Richard, what's wrong with you? Richard rises from the bed. So this is like not really, I don't know, happening in the same way that it is in the film. And then Seth slowly turns to his brother, then walks towards him. And then Richard backs up. This is not how it's happening in the film. First of all, Seth actually looks at the scene for a very extended period of time. He doesn't turn away and he doesn't cover his eyes. He looks at it, and Richard stands behind him, just like casually chewing on his burger, right? This is interesting because I wonder why they chose to do it like that, because those are two quite different scenes. Obviously, they probably tried to do both and decided that this is a better option. What this scene that we did get in the movie eventually gives us is the fact that Richard is not very concerned about the image this creates, and he's not so scared of his brother that he would just like back away and start kind of defending himself right away, right? He does try to verbally start defending himself, not very vigorously, I feel like. I mean, the lie is not even that compelling. He doesn't walk away anywhere. When Seth eventually turns towards him and starts questioning him, he doesn't start backing away straight away. Only eventually there's kind of this, well, a bit of, well, violence, I guess you could say, a bit of an altercation between them. But That is the difference for me between how it was in the script and how it is in the movie, is that Richard is not fearful of his brother necessarily.
A line that I also found interesting here that Richard says is when he starts to explain what happened, he says, wrong, 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 wrong. Once you left, she became a whole different person. And that reminded me a bit of Hitchcock, the movie Psycho, right?
Mm.
And where the main character Bates is also, well, yeah, has a split personality, and he becomes anxious and irritated when he is confronted to what actually happened. And it's also interesting here that it's not Richard turning into a different person, but Gloria turning into a different person. So yeah, Richard is framing this completely different from what actually happened or what we guess or should have happened.
And then eventually, I mean, they hug it out actually after this argument, and after he again Seth again tries to establish the rules and says, we don't do that and we don't do this. Say, I understand, Seth. And so he makes Richard repeat after him, right? And then eventually the scene ends in this hug, and then Seth says, we get into Mexico and la 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 la, and the shit's not gonna matter. And this is kind of interesting. What do you think about the last line of the scene? Coming from Seth specifically.
Maybe Seth is also a bit hopeful, or it's wishful thinking on his part that things are going to get or going to be different once they cross Mexico. Maybe he believes this is just something that's happening now because they're on the run, and his brother is also in a difficult situation. Yeah, and here, yeah, he hugs his little brother. I mean, and this is, I guess, from Seth's perspective, is like he doesn't see him as a killer, but
Hmm.
as his little brother, and because he knows him from his childhood and he knows what he's been through and so forth.
Hmm. Yeah, good point. It's also kind of well, the fact that it's not gonna matter. That is interesting to me because although Seth says this is not who I am just a thief. He says I am just a thief. But then he follows it up with, I don't kill people that I don't have to kill. So you're not just a thief, you're also a murderer. He's not like, he tries to keep this kind of, in a way, a good guy facade, but he definitely is not a good guy. And the fact that he is saying that all those people that we just killed while you are trying to, well, we are trying to get out of this country, that's just gonna go all away and we're gonna forget about it like it was a nightmare and it's all gonna be great. That is, yeah, also very questionable behavior, obviously. And coming from Seth, which you follow as a protagonist, this is interesting. How you just like you follow a very flawed character, and yet you still somehow associate with him and you have some sympathy for him. Well, to be fair, it helps that he is played by a very hot and young George
Yeah,
Clooney. So,
yeah, yeah, I wanted to say that helps as well. But yeah, it's a good point that he's flawed, but we still root for him because I guess because of his relationship towards his brother mainly. Okay, so after the scene between Seth and Richard, to summarize this briefly, they get into the rooms with the Fullers because the plan is that the Fullers take them over the border to Mexico with their RV, so the Fullers smuggle them into Mexico. And when they're on the way there, but also I think in the motel room of the Fullers, I think one interesting aspect is when Kate comes out of where she's wearing like a bikini, it says in the script, Richard immediately goes towards her and behind her, and then in the script it's written that he hallucinates or he has a dream about him and Kate, and then Kate asks him to kiss me or something along those lines. I thought that was interesting because now we are inside Richard's head, and it plays to what I was saying before, that he is, well, at this point we can see he's delusional or crazy or a bit like Gollum, and it's how I view it. And I think there's a similar scene later when they're about to cross the border and Richard and Kate are hiding in the bathroom. For me, this is proof for the audience, that visual proof that, well, Richard is not right in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
They manage to cross the border, and then they get to this famous or infamous tavern called the Titty Twister, and it's a strip club, a bar where bikers and all sorts of people hang out. And I thought the design of the front of the facade was very interesting, with these neon lights and this sort of carnivalesque and
Mm-hmm.
bizarre and, yeah, sort of underworld
Mm-hmm.
lish. And you see bikers like in a punk rocker sort of style, but mixed with Mexico, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all weird and interesting and that thing. But yeah, we wanted to get to a scene. Is this already after we find out that there are vampires? I guess
This
so,
is
right?
after, because there is a part of this conversation is about the fact that they have to fight this evil, and the faith is something that can help them, right? And I guess it's not it is a bit of a trope for vampire films, where we talk about faith being strong or not, and as how this can help in the fight against vampires, because obviously one aspect of fighting vampire, or several aspects, that this involves certain actions or artifacts of religion, and that makes, well, Jacob an asset, right, in this fight. And the fact that he is a faithless preacher doesn't help them. And so this is kind of Seth trying to preach to Jacob to kind of get his faith back and try to
Pun
help them
intended.
survive. Yeah.
So before that, we also have an exchange between Seth and Jacob, where when they get to the bar, and Jacob is pushing back a bit on Seth that he should keep his cool, and that's also sort of what we mentioned, the rough edges around Jacob. And here this confrontation between them continues, but now it's, I guess, here it's as well. They are pushing, Seth and Jacob are pushing themselves in a way so that they are able to reach their common goal, which is, in this case, fighting off the vampires.
Hmm.
One of the lines, I'll read this, that Seth says to Jacob is, Seth says, "I'm not taunting you. We need you. A faithless preacher doesn't mean shit to us. But a man who's a servant of God can grab a cross, shove it in these monsters' asses. A servant of God can bless the tap water and turn it into a weapon." Seth rises. "I know why you lost your faith. How could true holiness exist in your if your wife can be taken away from you and your children? Now, I always said God can kiss my fucking ass. Well, I changed my lifetime tune about 30 minutes ago, because I know without a doubt what's out there trying to get in here is pure evil and straight from hell. And if there is a hell and those monsters are from it, then there's got to be a heaven. Now, which are you, a faithless preacher or a mean motherfucking servant of God?"
Well done.
I think this is just a great writing.
I mean, this is Tarantino writing. This is the
Exactly.
Tarantino
So
wording. Yeah. No, but there's also discrepancy in this script and in the film, because after this scene happens in the script, it says Jacob has to laugh at that. That's not what happens in the movie, and I'm glad it doesn't, because if I read this, I'm like, God, this is so cheesy if he has to laugh at that. I really didn't, when I read this, I'm like, I hope that's not how it went in the movie. And if you watch it, it really isn't. He doesn't, first of all, he doesn't laugh. he is still in the solemn, well, way that he was before this whole tirade happened. And moreover, when he repeats and he says that he is a servant of God, he chooses not to use the swear words. So I think he just says, I am a mean servant of God. And I think this is suitable to the character. It's consistent with the character. I believe in this character the way that it is in the film. And I think it is better because if he laughed, I mean, just a second ago, his wife's death gets mentioned, and I don't know, it wouldn't work if it happened the way that it is written. At least that's what I think. And for me, the consistency of the character is more important than this kind of comedic value of the way that it was in the script.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it breaks the tone a bit. And I mentioned in Harvey Keitel's performance that it's quite different, but it's also, I think, always very restrained in a way and very calm.
Hmm.
And if this scene would happen as written, then I think that that breaks, like you said, the character for me.
Hmm. I think if he used the swear words, it wouldn't be so bad. Like I think that would be that wouldn't break the scene. But if he laughed, that's what would break the scene because like I don't see it. How can that be?
Yeah, yeah, and I think what even removing the swearing for me it rings true to the character. But yeah, that line is very Tarantino, that swearing, and I think that's interesting because in a way it brings this whole situation down to earth in a bit. I mean, this unrealistic thing with vampires, and it also makes it really entertaining to watch and sort of acknowledges that okay, this is fun or this is ridiculous. Or so I like the language that Seth uses here. I mean, the swearing and whatnot, but which is something that he did before, but especially here, I think it brings the whole thing down to earth, and also using the swear word motivates Jacob and the other characters to, okay, hey, we have a problem here, an issue, we need to solve this. Let's get our shit together, and yeah, it's sort of a pep talk here.
Hmm.
Not sort of, it is a pep talk. There is I think, a talk between Jacob and his kids about. I think in the movie they're hiding in this sort of in this cellar or something, or in this room. And at that point, I believe that Jacob had already been bitten,
Hmm.
and he tells them that, okay, I only have a couple of minutes left. This is actually in the script. I'm going to fight with you until the end, but once I turn, please kill me because then I'm not going to be Jacob anymore. I'm going to be a creature
Hmm.
of hell. He also tells them that he loves them. So I think it's a nice scene, and also sets up the scale of what's going to happen, but it's not about faith anymore at this point. What maybe is a bit about faith, and then here we have to jump back, is Richard's death. Because well, he gets bitten and then he gets bug up as a vampire. Seth believes that Richie is dead because he went down to the floor, and Seth tells Richie, already crying over his brother, Richie, I'm sorry I fucked things up. You'd really like it in El Rey. We'd find peace there. I love you, little brother. I'll miss you bad. And then Richard gets up as a vampire. I'm glad you feel that way, Seth. I love you too. And well, we find out he's a vampire. Here, I believe this line for me is a bit about religion and forgiveness. So when Seth is about to kill Richie as a vampire, he says to him, Richie, here's the peace in death I could never give you in life. So I think that's a very interesting line, and
Hmm.
also I think not only a relief for Richie, but also a relief
Hmm.
for Seth.
Yeah.
That he doesn't have to bear this cross anymore about him taking care of his brother.
Hmm. That's true. And also, we get this kind of vibe of always having had to take care of him, look out for him, and he knows that he is a very haunted person. I mean, clearly there's some kind of codependency issue in those two's relationships.
Yeah, but maybe it's also interesting that I guess it takes this that Richie is turned into a different thing. I mean, at least physically, for Seth to acknowledge that okay, Richie does have a problem, and from this point forward, there's no going back, and it's pointless or pointless of trying to deny what Richie actually is and what he actually does. I don't know. Is this line religious or maybe I'm mistaken?
Um, I guess it is adjacent. Not necessarily strictly religious, I guess. And as Seth says himself, he is not religious. He doesn't believe in God. So it's not so much about religion as much as it is just generally about finding some form of peace. But that doesn't necessarily have to be religious, I think.
Then the other important death is, well, of course, Jacob dies because as he's turning into a vampire, Scott shoots him. I think it's with balloons of water,
Hmm.
I mean, holy water.
Hmm.
And then Jacob bursts into flames. And at the same time, Scott is turning into is attacked by bats and turning into a vampire, and Kate's the one who shoots him. Yeah. So this is, I guess, the other point why Scott is in the movie just to make this situations even more dire for Kate. I
Hmm.
mean, she basically loses her whole
Hmm.
family,
That's
and
true. Yeah.
it's a heroic death for Scott as well. But do you remember how you felt when you first watched this movie or when you watched this movie?
When I first watched this movie, I don't even remember when that was. I mean, what it invokes in you, what feelings, or what is the question?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, was this really tragic when Scott died or when Jacob died?
I mean, obviously, Jacob's death is has more weight to it than Scott's. I mean, we in the beginning already said Scott is kind of a little bit of this kind of token character. He doesn't necessarily bring a lot to the table in the sense of, well, value to the team, at least not as much as Jacob. And yeah, I mean, his value is in, as we said, in the dynamic with the with his family and in his death, basically. So his death again still has value only in the kind of the paradigm of his relationship with his family still. So it's only because Kate is then left alone, right? She not only is she left alone without her family, without protection of her family, but she is actually left alone with a very dangerous man, whatever that's going to mean eventually. I mean, he still protects her in that moment, but it's still, I think this is what the weight of this of his death is, but I wouldn't say that his death was necessarily the most tragic one.
Jacob's death is a bit more impactful because, well, we had that exchange between him and his kids that I mentioned before. And Scott's death happened so quickly. I mean, it's really
Hmm.
unexpected. But yeah, that you don't really get. I don't remember even if you get a great reaction from Kate in the movie. But yeah, it just happens very quickly.
Hmm.
You said the protectiveness of Seth, and that reminded me when they're crossing the border. I think there is. I don't remember it exactly, but Richard is about is I think that he is with Kate in the bathroom and he's about to lose control. And that's when Seth punches Richard and
Hmm.
knocks him out.
Hmm.
And maybe he's protective of both of them in the moment for a little bit. In regards to, well, he's protective a bit of Kate, but also of Richard. Just
Hmm.
occurred to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I agree. We obviously don't know who is more important. I think still for him, Richard is more important. If he had to choose, he would probably choose Richard's safety over everybody else's. But yeah, I guess he just doesn't, he tries to avoid trouble from the point with the hostage, from Gloria's scene. We kind of, I guess, he probably tries to avoid any more complications and any more casualties because so far it hasn't been working out for them very well, I think. And if they want to go through the border, then they have to make it work somehow.
I also read or interpreted this care or protectiveness between that Seth has for Kate and in their last exchange
Hmm.
when the movie closes, or at least maybe it's not protectiveness. Could it be that in the movie Seth tells Kate something like "Take care, kid"? Does he use the word "kid"? I don't remember. I have the feeling that he does. It's not the case here in the script.
I got to the scene where the sunlight reflects from the disco ball. That's the best. That's just the type of content that we need.
Let's just read the ending of the movie
The
and the
last page.
description. The description reads: Seth by his Porsche looks bad at Kate. Kate stands alone. The whole desert seems between them. So much to say, but no words.
I'm sorry.
Me too. Long pause.
See ya.
Later, Seth turns his back on her just as he opens the door. Kate says behind him, Seth. Seth turns around. You want some company? Seth smiles.
I like the way that it's written here. Kate, honey, I may be a bastard, but I'm not a fucking bastard. He blows her a kiss across the desert.
She
I
blows
mean,
one
that's a bit
back.
much.
Seth in his car and gone. Kate turns around, face endless desert before her, and begins her long walk home. I think actually in the movie she drives away with the RV, but yeah.
Yeah, interesting. No, but like it's really first of all, he calls her honey, which he doesn't in the movie. It's a
Mm.
bit condescending in a way, I feel like. But also the kisses they blow each other, that's a bit much too.
They don't do that in the movie, right?
They don't do that, no.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like it also a bit more how it plays out in the movie, but what I was thinking, I like this line here that you just mentioned. I'm not a fucking bastard. Like we discussed before that he had in his mind, Seth is not as terrible as he actually is, and he also distanced himself from Richie a bit.
Hmm.
Like I mentioned, I believe in the movie he says something different, but for me at least, Kate is his new little brother, or Kate takes his place for Richard in a sense that, well, they now have gone through this thing together, and there's this bond that they share, and maybe Seth even cares for him in a way similar to how he did for his brother. What do you think?
I mean, I guess in a way, I he's not beyond kind of caring for people, I guess is what we get. And he doesn't want to use her. He doesn't want to subject her to any more harm. And he knows that she's not going to be safe with him. So it's interesting also the fact that well, first of all, he doesn't take responsibility over her. He did have responsibility over his brother, or at least he thought he did. Second of all, he knows that although she is probably going to be in danger by herself, she's probably either going to come out of it or she's not going to be in as much danger if she stays with him. So, yeah, interesting thought, I guess.
That's a good point. I mean, he sort of costs her that she will be okay, that she has the abilities to do so. And also, like I've said, that Richard was Seth Frost to carry. And well, at least Seth thought that once they got over to Mexico, it would all be all right for him and his brother. And it is fine for Seth, but it's because he's able to move on without his brother. That's how I read it, at least. So let us get to closing thoughts about the movie. I guess the structure, the themes, the arcs. Yeah, the characters that do have a bit more of an arc, I believe, are I think it's mostly Seth. The rest, I don't feel like they have a great arc. You know who had a great arc?
Mm.
Noah.
Oh my God, look at you.
I always wanted to
You
do that
know
joke.
what a great arc.
Yeah, but what do you think? Character-wise, do you agree? I guess Seth is the one with the protagonist or the one with the arc in this movie.
Is he the one with the arc though? I feel like the arc is most prominent for Jacob in a way.
True,
And
yeah, for Jacob as well.
I guess because technically speaking, the final girl is our home girl in this movie.
Hmm.
She is the one who's supposed to have an arc. And she kind of does. I mean, she comes from this innocent church choir type of girl, into a badass vampire killer. So she also has quite a bit of an arc. Seth, not so sure. I mean, does he really change in that process?
That's true. I think probably his core doesn't change a lot. I mean, he's still like he's still a bastard. I view it more that he changed because of what happened in relation to his brother. For me, that was actually a bit more the other way around. That I thought that Kate didn't have that much of an arc, or at least in the movie, it's more external that we see stuff happening to her. We don't get to learn a lot about her internal struggles. At least I did think about that in the end that okay, now she has to live with or cope with losing her brother and her father, which must be a
Hmm.
terrible thing. And like you said, she's turned into sort of a vampire killer. But it's yeah, I feel like that's we discussed it in the beginning that it's a bit of a trope or maybe a cliche or a bit
Hmm.
standard. There's not a spin to it where I say,
Yeah,
okay, this is different or new.
I agree. I think, I mean, it's kind of a templated arc, if you want to call it like that. There's nothing, I guess, original to how her character develops throughout.
Structurally, I think this is also, I would say this is like three acts. Maybe the introduction of the characters, then the conflict is actually, where is the conflict here? I guess the conflict is the when they get over the border, or is the conflict when they are at the bar and the vampires start appearing?
This is a good question because I just feel like this is not a very, at least the way that it seems to me, it's not somehow traditionally structured in the sense that we get to the main conflict, I guess, if you wanna put it that way. You would think that if it's a vampire film, the vampires have to appear pretty early, but it takes a very long time for that to come, right? And I don't know actually. Like it's hard for me to judge. I think I would have to look into it a bit more to be able to say why exactly it's structured like that, what this does and how this works. But I think what is clear is that vampires are not necessarily the primary antagonist, or at least for the longest time in the film, because they don't appear for such a long time, they just structurally speaking cannot be the primary antagonist.
I have lots of thoughts on this, and I agree with you. It's not traditional because, well, what you said, the scene or the whole act at the at club is in the last stretch of the movie, I guess, last 30 minutes or so. And that's more about the external conflict that they have to kill the vampires, and it's also more about where there's a tonal break there, right? Because before it was more about gangsters, and here it's, well, it turns into a horror movie.
Hmm.
But if you look at it from the internal conflict, I would say, yeah, probably the whole scene at the club is the climax or the third act, because like I said, the conflict is in the middle with Seth having to deal with his brother
Hmm.
and taking care of his brother. And once they get to the club and Richard is turned, then it's clear what he has to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, also the way that you mention it, that it changes into a horror film kind of midway through or a bit later. Initially, we are introduced to more of a thriller crime road movie, I guess, and then it completely changes. And maybe that is also the reason why certain things are shown in a different way, because obviously the way that the horror part, let's say, of this film, the vampire part of this film looks, it is very grotesque, it's very over the top, which cannot necessarily be said about the beginning of the film. Even the scene with the motel with the hostage, that's why we were discussing it, is not a very explicit scene necessarily. It's like there is a lot of explicit, implied explicitity to it, let's say, but we're not shown it necessarily. But then this changes when the vampires come, right? This is very over the top then by the end of it.
Yeah, and this is, I believe, also a very Tarantino-esque or a trademark by Tarantino, in that usually the climax, the last act, is very over the top, maybe even gory, but very graphic, full of violence. I was thinking of movie like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or maybe Kill Bill as examples. And I remember when I watched this, that I was all for this tonal change and all the
Mm-hmm.
badassery that happens in that last act. So yeah, you either buy into that or not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, yeah, you, like usually Tarantino writes these scenes as that's made to be entertaining, and yeah, at least from how it is portrayed.
You
Or
know, I just realized, we mentioned Psycho before, and actually, if you think about it, the structure of From Dusk Till Dawn is quite similar to how Psycho works, because we follow one character, and what we know about this character is that she did some shady things and she's trying to get out and get away, and we think she is the protagonist. And then there is a change to, well, the genre in a way and the story, and then we are in a completely different film, right? So I feel like this is kind of what happens here as well. We follow shady characters as our protagonists. I mean, they don't die midway through the film, but in a way a perspective changes, right? Because mm, it's almost like our protagonist now is also the family or our final girl in a way, right? And that is also why Richard is an antagonist throughout the first half of the story. And I guess he continues to be in a way also into the vampire sequence, but we kind of have like almost a layering of villains, right? We have Richie in the first half and then vampires in the second, and both exercise this. pressure on, well, our characters that are trying to survive, including actually Seth, because Richie is not, well, he is also putting Seth in danger.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love that comparison as well, like structurally between this and Psycho. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, then have well, one side note is that I read on IMDb that the Ezekiel speech the in Pulp Fiction that famously Samuel Jackson delivers
Hmm.
was actually written for Jacob's character in this movie, or at least that's what Robert Rodriguez claims.
Hmm.
And at least I can see it. That's I mean, because of who the character is. But maybe that and the way that Samuel Jackson delivers it would have not matched the character that we described here. It goes along the lines of what we said that Jacob use swearing wouldn't
Hmm.
be a great fit for that character.
Hmm.
And the other is the title, From Dusk Till Dawn. Apparently, this comes from movie drive-ins that had a sign that says "From Dusk Till Dawn." That's how the movie's played. I was thinking, well, it's not exactly the movie, but the movie also takes place during, I don't know, the span of a day.
Hmm.
Not exactly from dusk till dawn. What does take place from dusk till dawn is, I think, the scene at the club at the Titty
Hmm.
Twister. Yeah, so in that sense, it is also very structures or classical that it takes around the day to to get through it. Any closing thoughts, scenes that we forgot? Anything that you wanna get off your chest before we close this episode?
Uh, I would actually also be interesting to think about what really makes this film such a cult classic, because I recently rewatched it with some friends who have never seen it. Also, some friends who are skeptical about vampire films. So it was still fun for people, interestingly enough. I think what can make it fun is that it's not only a vampire film, it's a vampire film that doesn't necessarily take itself seriously, and generally not a film that takes itself seriously, whatever the genre. But this is, I guess, something to expect from a Tarantino slash Rodriguez movie. Um, yeah, I mean, I love the movie, and weirdly enough, as we said already, it's my childhood film. And yeah, I love it.
When I watched this movie, I knew about the vampire twist, and
Hmm.
I was actually expecting it to be a vampire movie, but then
Hmm.
I found out that's actually just the last act.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I was a bit surprised. I don't remember if this movie was sold or marketed as a vampire movie, but like you said, it's more about also like the thriller aspect or the gangster aspect, and the vampires are just like the over the top climax.
Hmm.
But yeah, I also really enjoyed this movie. And especially, I also remember really enjoying that image revealing that behind the club, there's this Aztec
Hmm.
temple with all of
The
these.
best.
That's, I don't know, it's such a
And with
great
the
image.
soundtrack that it has, the best.
That is all for From Dusk Till Dawn. I hope you liked this little experiment that we did here. Let us know what you thought of it. And I'll leave you with one last vampire quote that I hope I haven't used before.
Ooh.
Edward Lobo says, "Do you know who the fuck I am? I'm Ted fucking Lobo. I am Count Dracula." You win.
Nice. I knew it's gonna be a vampire quote this time.
Yeah. Renfield.
Cage did it all. He did it all.
Yeah.
I think we deserve, and everybody who listens to us deserves, a full filmography breakdown at some point.
At some point. At some point. Yes. Okay. Thanks for listening and catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.